Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his work Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes is developing what he takes to be a science that will tell us about human beings and give us absolutely reliable knowledge about how we work. So we could think of this as psychology, but also as moral philosophy or ethics, and it's going to extend into his political doctrine as well, which I think is what most people know him for. And one of the key moves that's taking place is happening in chapter 6, where he is examining animal motion and the endeavor, that's a technical term that he uses, that it leads to, and we could say branches off into, and then the passions or drives or emotions that are going to be produced by this. And he will talk about a number of different passions. We're going to look at those separately, this long analysis and list that he has. We want to look at how he develops this more generally. So he begins by distinguishing two different kinds of motions within animals, that is, living things that move around. He says that one is called vital, and this is begun in generation, so from the beginning onward, and continues without interruption through their whole life. So the course of the blood, the pulse, breathing, concoction, nutrition, excretion. You don't really need to think about these things too much, except if something goes wrong, right? Digestion, you don't actually consider it unless you get indigestion or you're not able to eat something that you want to. You don't worry too much about the circulation of the blood unless you have circulation problems, and we could go on and on and on. So we're not really interested in that sort of motion. What we're interested more in is what he calls voluntary motion or animal motion. Now, we do have to be a little bit careful here. When we hear this term voluntary, we typically associate that with something conscious on our part, something deliberate, something chosen. And Hobbes is using it in a broader sense just to contrast against vital motion. Voluntary motion can be different than it is. And as we're going to see, it very often does have a certain kind of inconstancy to it. So what are some examples? To go, to speak, to move any of our limbs in such manner as is first fancied in our minds. Now, a lot of this is not stuff that we are very consciously thinking out. He says, sense is motion in the organs and interior parts of our body. And going, speaking, the like voluntary motions depend always on a precedent thought of whither, which way, and what. It's evident that the imagination, so very important thing here, is the first internal beginning of all voluntary motion. And, animals besides us have imagination as well. And he goes on and he says, the small beginnings of motion within the body of a human being before they appear in walking, striking, speaking, other visible actions are called by this term endeavor. And so we've got voluntary motions and their beginnings are this endeavor. And he says endeavor has basically two different forms of directedness. So when it is towards something which caused it, we call it appetite or desire. And, he says that it can signify the desire of food, like hunger and thirst, but it could be towards all sorts of other things. He also talks about where we get these words from, the Latin language. And then we have, if we're going away from something, we have aversion, right? He actually uses the word fromward something. So some things we're attracted to, we're motivated to be involved with. Other things, it's the opposite. Hobbes takes this to be the most fundamental of our motions within us, caused by other things. He's not completely unique in that way. There are other philosophers who hold similar things. Now, he notes something that is particularly distinctive to us because we call things other names. So he says, what people desire, they're also said to love. And things that they're averse to are things that they hate. And Hobbes is willing to say this is basically the same thing. It's the same phenomenon. We just call it by different names, so we don't want to get confused. We could say that we love some things and hate some things. But it's interesting because he's going to bring up a third option. So he says, the things that we neither desire, that is love, or hate, we are said to contemn. Contempt is nothing else but immobility or contumacy of the heart in resisting the action of certain things. Proceeding from that, the heart is already moved otherwise or other more potent objects or from want of experience. So there's some things that we just don't care about, and the word that Hobbes uses for that is contempt. So contempt is very different than hate. Hate is aversion to something, or resistance to it. We don't want that. Love is an attraction to something, right? And we're going to come back to contempt in just a moment, but he says that desire and love are the same thing, except that by desire we signify the absence of the object, love more commonly the presence of the same. Same with aversion, we signify the absence, hate the presence of it. Now, some things, he says, are basically natural to us, right? We have an appetite of food. We want to eat. That's normal for us human beings. We also have aversions to things that we don't like. But some of these, he says, appetites of particular things proceed from experience, trials of their effects upon ourselves or other people. So, we see somebody else enjoying something and we're like, oh, that's probably pretty good. We see something that we consider bad to happen to somebody else and we consider it bad because they say, ouch, or, oh, I don't like this, right? And we're like, oh, yeah, I should be averse to that as well. Or we undergo it ourselves. We eat some sweet candy and we're like, oh man, this is good. I love candy. We take something that we don't like, pop it in our mouths, or, oh, this tastes like crap, right? Now we're averse to it. And we could talk about all sorts of other experiences, of other senses, bad sounds, good sounds. We have to have experience of things. So he says that we can understand goodness and evil in terms of these appetites. Whatever a person loves, they are going to view as good, and they're going to use that term good for it. Right? He says, whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire, that is it which he for his part calls good. Now, not everybody else will call it good. I could see that you have an appetite for doing something that I don't consider good. I don't have an appetite for it, and I won't call it good, but you will, right? Likewise, things that we are averse to, that we hate, we call evil. And then there's this third category of things that we don't care about. And Hobbes says that we call them vile. And this just means low class or inconsiderable. We don't consider it. We don't care about it. And he says that these words are always used in relation to the person who uses them. So here's where we should actually pause for a moment and think about something that's very important about Hobbes's own doctrine when it comes to these matters. Is there anything that is good in and of itself or evil in and of itself? Hobbes actually says no. This is going to put him in opposition to many other moral theorists prior to him and coming after him as well. So this is a view on ethics that makes good and evil effectively subjective or relative to the person using it. He says that there's nothing simply and absolutely so when it comes to good, evil, or inconsiderable, nor any common rule of good and evil to be taken from the nature of the objects themselves, but from the person of the man where there is no commonwealth, or in a commonwealth from the person that represented it, or an arbitrator or a judge. So it's not just anything goes whatsoever. There's going to be reasons why people say that something is good or evil or inconsiderable. And once you actually do have a working society, you can fix these terms kind of, more or less. There's always going to be some deviation. But he says that this is the way things are, and we are fooling ourselves to think otherwise. Then he starts talking about the Latin tongue. Why? Because his audience is familiar with that. And he says that the Latin tongue has two words whose significations approach to those of good and evil, but are not quite the same. Pulchrum and turpe. So, pulchrum means something like beautiful, but as he points out, it could also mean fair, handsome, gallant, honorable, comely, amiable, and for turpe, foul, deformed, ugly, base, nauseous, and the like, as the subject shall require. So, we're going to stick with the Latin terms just because we have so many English terms for each of them. And here he's going to make an interesting differentiation. He's going to say there's different ways in which something could be good or evil. And here he's sort of explaining something that previous moral theorists would also distinguish. So, good, we could say, comes in three different varieties. There's good in the promise, good in the effect, and good in the means. Likewise, evil, promise, effect, and means. Good in the promise is pulchrum, something that is, we could actually say, attractive, something that we find, beautiful or handsome or noble or anything like that. Good in its effect is jucundum, which means pleasant, something that he actually uses the word delightful, something that we get joy and delight from. And then good in means, that is to produce some other good, utile, which means useful, or you could actually translate it as the term utility if you wanted to. So three different kinds of goodness, right? And likewise for evil. In the promise, turpe, disgusting, deformed, ugly, whatever we want to, ignoble, base, right? In its effect, molestum, unpleasant, it bothers us, right? We don't like it. And then as a means, inutile, useless, or we could actually even say harmful. And these are, moral qualities typically within various moral theories. So Hobbes is giving his own take on that. Notice that he doesn't do the same for what we contemn, which is vile or inconsiderable. He doesn't say, well, there's three kinds of that. Why? Because we're not being moved towards it. There isn't any endeavor. We don't care about it, so we don't have to worry about whether it's in the promise, effect, or means. And he's going to then say that we get these simple passions, appetite, desire, love, aversion, hate, joy, and grief that we can derive from these. And all of these can have their names for diverse considerations diversified, meaning that they aren't the end of the story. They can be further distinguished into a whole set of other human passions. But they all ultimately derive from this very basic dynamic that Hobbes is setting out, which he thinks is offering us for the first time the basis for having a genuine science of human nature with respect to our moral psychology.